Continue about mindfulness skills. Um, there are some handouts that provide more definitions about mindfulness that are not starred handouts. But the next starred handout is actually handout number 3, and it shows the Venn diagram of a rational mind or reasonable mind and emotion mind with wise mind in the middle. Just have to tell you that after teaching the last many years of this, I prefer the term rational mind more than reasonable mind. Just because of, due to common usage, many people find that reasonable mind is closer to wise mind. The idea here is, let me step back a second. The first big point of the module, once you're into it, is to get across everybody able to understand what we mean by wise mind. That is the central concept of the module. And then there are 6 skills for approaching or trying to lay the conditions to get wise mind. Wise mind is the mind you want, the state of mind you want to be in when you make decisions in your life that are important. It's a more balanced mind. It's a centered mind. It's intuitive mind. It brings together both a logical approach to things, in other words, an understanding of how the world works, an understanding of consequences that's kind of rational, and how to get things done, and also an emotional perspective, an emotional state of mind where you take into account what means something to you, what matters, what emotions are going to be created by what you're doing. So it is both with reference to emotionality and rationality. It's with reference to being intuitive, and most people in their lives at some points have had the experience of getting to wise mind. And usually they know that if they look back or if they're in the middle of it by realizing, this is what's, excuse me, this is what's right for me. This feels right. This is my balanced, this is aligned with who I am deeply. And so getting to wise mind, though, can be quite tricky because sometimes you think you're in wise mind and you're actually more in an emotionally tainted mind, and you just want to go in that direction. But wise mind is sometimes takes a while to get to, and there's no simple step-by-step formula to get there. So one guideline is to move towards what includes both rational perspective and emotional perspective, and there's some teaching about that, and I recommend reading the more details of the manual before you teach that. But that's, let me say what I think is most important about getting to wise mind in teaching it. The single best thing that can happen in your skills group when you teach wise mind is that you help people come to examples from their own life. And then they get it. Then they get, oh, right, that's when I was in wise mind. That's how I got into wise mind. And sometimes you get into wise mind just mysteriously. You fall into wise mind and you realize you wake up one morning after being on the fence about a decision, and then you realize, that's it. And that's what I'm going to do. And I know some people might disagree, but that is the right thing for me. And if you can stay with that, and if that truly is deep for you, then that's probably being in your wise mind. But in teaching it, you want everybody to get to one. So I'm trying to be patient in getting around the group and make sure everybody stops, takes a little time, thinks about when they've been in wise mind, what they were facing, how they got into wise mind. Maybe they got into wise mind by taking a long walk. Maybe they got into wise mind by listening to certain music. And maybe it was by talking to a certain friend with whom they always feel like they get into a more wise state of mind. 1,000 ways to get into wise mind. So it's very individual. So Linehan does something very helpful in the manual and in the worksheets or handouts, where she gives several metaphors, sort of stories for how to get into wise mind. Just suggest, each of these is suggestions, not a formula. And she herself says, don't just latch onto these. See which ones of these you think might be useful for yourself and your patients, and then try it out. And over time, figure out your own best way to help people get to wise mind. But these are things like you imagine that there's a flake of stone, just a flake that lands in a pond. And now that flake is light enough that it sort of stays at the top, but it's heavy enough that it gradually goes down under the water. And it goes back and forth with whatever are the currents in the water, and it works its way slowly down to the bottom of the pond. And then when it's at the bottom, that could be a metaphor for getting to wise mind. So it can take a while to let yourself drift down to wise mind and not to rush it. She gives a breathing exercise. Breathing in, I say wise, and you think why. Breathing out, I say mind. Wise mind. And do that while you're pondering what it is you're thinking about. You could call out, either in real life or in your mind, as if into a canyon where there's an echo, and ask the question that you need to ask. Is this the right person for me? And then wait for the answer. It may come right then, it may not come then, it may not come for a day or two, it may not come. But the idea is to pose the question and let wise mind provide the answer. She has other metaphors. I'll leave that to you to explore, and there's other ones you could make up to help your patients get there. But like I say, I think ultimately don't move on from this until you have each person have their own anchor points and they can learn from each other's anchor points. Sometimes you'll find somebody who says, I don't have it, I just don't have it. And I would suggest that you make the assumption that everybody has it. Everybody has the capacity for wise mind. In some people's lives, it's been knocked out of them, not the capacity for it, but the belief that they have it. So you try to help that person gently but persistently get to that point. Okay. Now, to get to wise mind, there are these 6 skills, and they're in 2 subgroups. Subgroup number 1 are called the what skills, W-H-A-T. Each of these, you might say, is a verb. It is a verb, each skill. One is to observe, another is to describe, and the other is to participate. And then there's 3 other skills that you might say are sort of modifiers of the first 3. The first one is non-judgmental or non-judgmentally. So for instance, you could observe non-judgmentally. Second one is one mindfully. We'll go over these. So you could observe one mindfully, or you could describe one mindfully, or you could participate one mindfully. And the third is called effectively, and effectively could be a modifier of any of the 3. Now, sometimes it's confusing for people to think, well, does this mean that what you do in your life in DBT, all you ever do is sit around and observe and describe and participate? That doesn't sound like a very big diet of life. But that would be a misunderstanding. The idea here is that whatever you do, whatever experience in your life you're relating to, whatever the phenomenon in your life you're relating to, whatever person you're relating to, you can use the skill of observe in that context. You could use describe, and you could use participate. And these are 3 different modes, you might say, 3 different ways to relate to experience. And each one brings advantages in terms of being mindful, being more aware, being more focused, and bringing about more emotional control and wise mind. Okay, so just be aware. There's these different ways to do it, but you can be mindful while you're running. You could be mindful while you're baking, while you're having a conversation with a friend. You can be mindful while you're very angry with things that are going on. So pretty much anything you can do mindfully or mindlessly. So as we go through these, we'll define what that means, the difference, okay? So Let's move forward into the what skills. Observe. So you can be looking at handouts if you want. Let me see where they are. So this will be mindfulness handout number 4, has the what skills with various points of the what skills, ways to think of it, brief, catchy comments that help you grasp it and help it get across to your patients. So observing, you might say, is the core skill of the core skills. That's how I think of it. It's like the bottom of the bottom. It is the foundation. And by that I mean that it is just the definition of being awake, of being aware. I can be talking to you without awareness, or I could be talking to you while being aware I am talking to you. You could talk to somebody with no awareness of how they're responding, and it's kind of mindlessly approaching the other person. Or you can be talking and be mindfully aware, observing, just noticing their face, noticing how they respond non-verbally, how they respond verbally. In other words, really observing is just when you have this part of yourself that I would call the observer part, that's there potentially all the time, but we often, you might say, don't have it turned on. You could drive from one place to another in your car completely mindlessly and not observe truly, not truly take in anything. You just automatically know how to get somewhere. Obviously, there's some observer operating, but unconsciously. But we're talking here about you're actually noticing what you pass. You're noticing the experience. You are there while you're there. Your observer is there while you're there. And so it's a very powerful thing, the difference between these two, whether you're observing or not observing. Because if you are observing, let's say you're extremely anxious, you can get caught up in your anxiety such that you are immersed in your anxiety. You are submerged in your anxiety. You feel there's nothing other than anxiety, and it defines your existence, and it can be agonizing. Or you can notice that you're anxious. You can just observe the sensations of anxiety. You can observe the thoughts, the fears, the stated internal fears of anxiety, the expectations you have because they're part of anxiety. There's a whole syndrome that includes thoughts and emotions and actions that's anxiety. And you can observe all of that as if looking down on it from a higher deck. And that would be to observe your anxiety, but you're observing the specifics of your anxiety. You could be observing, and we'll move on later to describing your anxiety by describing the specific physical sensations and thoughts that you're having. But observing is pre-describing. It's just before you verbalize anything or put a name on it. You just notice it's coming into your nervous system. You're observing something outside yourself. You come to a parking lot, just occurs to me, a large parking lot where there's many layers. And you arrive there and you think you know where you put your car. So you automatically walk to where you supposedly put your car. And you aren't really observing, you're just following your way back. And the first moment you start observing is when you realize, oh, where's my car? It's not where I thought it would be. And suddenly your observer apparatus is activated, like, oh, and you look around and you think back and you wonder where your car is. And so then you're really observing, right? There you do it just because you need to be doing it. And there are many situations in life that precipitate our observer function. Other situations in life we're not observing, but we deliberately activate our own observer function. In doing so, we gain additional control over our experience because we're not just going through our experience, we're observing things. And especially if our experience is troubling, to observe means to start to notice the contours and notice the mechanisms and notice what's going on. If you're really angry with somebody, you're filled with anger, you're boiling with rage,